Hello and welcome to The Security Show, where we hang out with the most influential experts in security, compliance, and identity.
To learn about the challenges they face and the technologies they use to solve them.
I'm Natalia Godyla from the Microsoft Security team and co-host of Security Unlocked.
And I'm Nick Fillingham, also from the Microsoft Security team and also co-host of the Security Unlocked podcast.
On with the show. Welcome to The Security Show. Today we are joined by Eva Galperin, who is the Director of Cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So thank you for joining us today. Eva, how is it going?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's going all right.
Well, today we've got all of our nail polish and nail stickers. So while we're talking to you about cybersecurity for vulnerable populations, we are going to be doing our nails. So have you decided on a color yet?
I have a variety here, and I think I'm gonna do, is that a black? I'm so predictable.
There's a black with like glitter in it.
I think this is just a flat, it's a slightly sparkly black.
So Eva, how did you get into the cybersecurity space and find your way to the EFF?
Well, the EFF sort of kidnapped me on the way to law school, and that I had already done a bunch of IT and security work, very, very early in my career. And then the internet bubble burst and no one I knew had a job. So I went back to school and my plan was to become a lawyer. And I decided to go to law school just in time for all the law jobs to dry up and become terrible. So I went to go work for EFF, and they have kept me ever since. I did legal intake, and then I worked in activism, and then I worked on the international team, and then I moved to the tech team and helped start a sort of team on the tech team called Threat Lab, which is focused entirely on vulnerable populations.
So Eva, what drew you to the domain of cybersecurity and why have you focused on vulnerable populations?
The thing that got me into information security in the first place was a love of breaking things and a lack of diligence about putting them back together again. I always loved that I got paid to take things apart. I thought that was extremely neat. And working on the needs of vulnerable populations really started when, probably around 2012, when I noticed that a lot of journalists and activists and other people in civil society were being targeted, mostly during the Arab Spring. And they were being targeted by government actors. And that wasn't getting a lot of attention. So I did a lot of work tracking those APTs and keeping track of what was going on in North Africa and the Middle East.
Eva, what is it that defines a population as being vulnerable? Do all populations have some degree of vulnerability, or is it a specific subset of people?
I think you're right to point out that everyone is vulnerable. Everything is hackable. But a vulnerable population is a population that falls outside of the parameters that the people who are making tools and platforms think about when they're modeling the threats that their users face. So they're the people who get left out in the cold because they're considered to be a special case. And a lot of my work has been about taking this attitude about edge cases and crushing it. I think it's really important to take the needs of the people who usually get pushed out to the periphery and really center them. Because if you build tools for people who have the most complicated needs, and then you will automatically also secure the people who don't have those needs. But it doesn't work the other way around. If you build tools for most people or the average person, you're actually going to leave a lot of people out in the cold.
There are different vulnerable populations, I assume, different subsets. So How do you build a more secure and private world for those different populations? What are the different approaches you take? Maybe start by describing some of those different populations that organizations should consider.
I started with journalists and activists who were doing work in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, and again, they had a whole set of problems that a white middle class person in Santa Clara did not. And so social media platforms and makers of email services and messengers were not really thinking about their needs when they were thinking about their users and the sort of standard way in which their products would be used. But it turns out that activists and journalists are not the only people with sort of needs that aren't being met. If, for example, you are a woman on the internet, especially on social media, you may face levels of harassment that say most men do not. If you are a person of color, if you are a queer person in, say, Uganda, then your queerness is illegal. So yeah, one of the big things that I've been thinking about is really the needs of so many people who the people who make platforms and tools simply don't think about.
Eva, how about children or minors or the elderly, people that aren't very familiar with how technology works? Do these qualify as vulnerable populations?
Yeah, these are definitely vulnerable populations. Children especially, and especially in the last year under COVID, where children have been going to school doing remote learning. And they have often been required to spend hours and hours in front of computers using tools that were not necessarily meant for them and that don't work for them very well.
Eva, on the tech side, do you feel that we have all of the solutions we need to address privacy challenges? Or are there gaps here, technical gaps that need to be filled?
This is not a situation that calls for new technologies. This is largely a situation that calls for us to think about how we build and use the technologies that we already have. And frequently, this means empowering users to have more control over their experience and who is able to contact them, how they're able to be contacted, how they're able to respond. The thing that I would be wary of is having the company itself, having the platform, judge whether or not this content is content that you want to see and leaving it up to them. Because historically, platforms are not very good at that. And they're going to censor things that you want to see, and they're going to let through things that you didn't want to see. So the more power that you have and the less you have to rely on the company to make that decision, the better.
So Eva, you're well known for the incredible work you've done around stalkerware. So can you describe what stalkerware is and the broader umbrella term of disciplinary technology and how it might impact vulnerable populations?
Stalkerware is a type of disciplinary technology, and it's the entire class of applications that are sold commercially to people, ordinary people with like no training or any kind of special abilities, anybody who can pay. For the purpose of spying on your spouse or on someone in your family or on an ex or on a soon-to-be ex. And the idea is that you covertly install this software on somebody else's device, usually their computer or their tablet or their phone, and it tells you everything which is happening on their computer or their tablet or their phone. So it's incredibly invasive, relatively easy to use, and very cheap. I did a whole bunch of work with victims of stalking and harassment online and with victims of domestic abuse. And while most of the people who came to me were not victims of stalkerware. The most common kind of spying that I saw was exes or somebody that they were involved with who had managed to compromise one or more of their accounts, so like their email account or their Instagram account or something like that. So usually what we saw was account compromise. But occasionally, I did see the use of stalkerware, and stalkerware was used to compromise all of the accounts and in a really persistent way. And often the most disturbing and violent cases that came to me were usually cases that involved the installation of stalkerware. So one of the things that I did was I went to the AV companies, the antivirus industry, and I said, hey, you guys build a product that ostensibly sees when there is bad software on your device, tells you about it, and allows you to remove it. So I got them to start talking to each other, and also to do a better job of detecting this kind of software. And in order to do that, I helped to found an organization called the Coalition Against Stalkerware. It currently has more than 30 members. I think today we just announced that we're going to be working with Interpol. So I'm very excited about that. And the work continues. Identifying stalkerware and correctly identifying it and allowing people to remove it is a moving target because the stalkerware is always changing, and it's always changing in ways specifically designed to evade people who are looking for it. So the percentage of all stalkerware that any given AV company finds is really fluctuating at any given time. I consider it to be a great achievement that around the time that I started doing this work, on average, about 60% of the samples that I was working with were not being detected by AV, and now the percentage is much higher. There's actually such a wide variety of techniques, and companies move at different speeds. But yeah, when it comes to detection, this stuff is often indistinguishable from malware.
And what are the monitoring technologies today to do that? So how are you tracking them and gathering intelligence on them?
Well, the good news is that this is actually much, much easier than tracking APTs. Because when governments spy on you, they are usually using software which they have built themselves, which is or software which they have bought at great cost that costs them hundreds and thousands of dollars. Whereas if you want to know what the latest stalkerware is out there, you can simply go online, buy it yourself, and then figure out exactly how it works. Yeah, the biggest problem that I had when I was working on APTs was finding samples of sort of the latest technology that was being used against journalists and activists and other vulnerable populations. And this is much easier now for stalkerware because you can just buy it.
Is there a resource? Is there a training? What would you say to the straight white men watching this video, maybe with not as fabulous nails as I have, to get better educated in this space and maybe understand how do they empower themselves to do better?
Others.
Yeah.
I would start with a couple of different resources. One is I'm going to just blatantly flog my coworker's new book, Silicon Values. So there's a book called Silicon Values. It just came out a couple weeks ago. It is by my colleague Gillian C. York, and it talks a lot about the issues of platform censorship. There is also a book called what was it? Design Justice by Sasha Constanza Bach, which I strongly recommend, and is very much about how do you design a world for the rest of us. I recommend the works of Zeynep Tufekci, who frequently works for the writes for the New York Times, and also has a book called Twitter and Tear Gas, which talks about sort of social media and North Africa and the Middle East. There's also a documentary called Coded Bias, which is on Netflix right now, which I really strongly recommend for understanding the ways in which AI and machine learning have sort of just helped to reinforce the biases that already exist in society, and talks about ways in which we might fight back against that.
Final check-in on nails. Eva, do you want to
right.
show us how you did?
Woo.
It's a little hard to see. We're a little far from the screen. Blue? Where did you go with in the end?
So I went mostly with a purple, which matches my hair, and also with a light blue. So I have a couple of light blue nails.
Very nice. I think I assumed I would make a lot of mistakes, so I started with abstract. Nick just went with stickers.
Yeah, I did. I've got butterflies, stars, what could either be stiletto shoes or music notes. I'm not sure.
Before we jump off here, I do want to make sure that we stop to see if there are any resources that you might be able to share with our audience in case somebody wants to follow you, a Twitter handle perhaps, or a blog.
I've got 3 resources to share. The first is that EFF's website is www.eff.org. I also recommend our guide to privacy and security online, which is called Surveillance Self-Defense, and you can get there at ssd.eff.org. We are at EFF on Twitter for EFF opinions, and if you are looking for my opinions, which are a little spicier, then I am Evacide, EVACIDE.
Thanks for joining us again on The Security Show. Reach out to us on @MSFTSecurity on the Twitters, or comment below to share your thoughts.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode. See you next time.